When you think about self-defense, it often feels like a really modern thing, right?
Yeah.
Something that came about recently.
Yeah, a reaction to today's world.
But get this, some of the very first ways people fought without weapons,
hmm
way back in the Far East, they go back thousands of years,
Mm.
like before written history sometimes.
It really puts it in perspective, doesn't it? That basic need to protect yourself is just ancient.
Exactly. And that brings us perfectly to today's deep dive.
Hmm.
We're looking into Kyokushinjutsu. It's a self-defense method,
Yeah.
and it's one you specifically asked us to explore.
And the fascinating thing about Kyokushinjutsu, well, it's not just a list of moves. It's a really complete system.
Complete how?
Think of it like building a house. You need the history, that's the blueprint, then the actual techniques, the physical stuff. Those are your materials.
Okay.
And then you need the plan for putting it all together, the mental game, the tactics, the ethics. Kyokushinjutsu really tries to cover all those bases.
Gotcha. And our main source for figuring this all out is the book you sent over, Kyokushinjutsu, The Method of Self-Defense.
That's the one.
And it's not just pictures of techniques. It really digs into the philosophy behind it, how they train, and like you said, the history. It connects it all the way back to ancient China and Japan.
Yeah, it lays out that whole lineage. So think of this session as your shortcut to understanding Kyokushinjutsu's core ideas.
What are we hitting specifically?
We'll trace its roots, starting in China, see how it developed in Japan, look at its unique way of approaching, well, practical self-defense, and also the strong moral code that comes with it.
So whether you're already doing martial arts or you're just curious about self-protection philosophies, there should be something valuable here.
Definitely. Should be really insightful.
All right, let's rewind then, back to the beginning.
Sure.
The book really hammers home how much martial arts in the Far East owe to what was happening early on in China.
Yeah, it paints China as this cultural engine, influencing philosophy, art, and how people learn to fight or defend themselves.
And it zeroes in on Ju Jutsu, which is key for Kyokushinjutsu. Where did that start?
Well, it didn't just pop up in Japan out of nowhere. The groundwork was definitely laid in China, particularly with a very old practice called shuaijiao.
Shuaijiao, like wrestling.
Sort of, but more than that, it wasn't just about takedowns. It was woven into the culture, tied to ideas like uprightness, virtue, even harmony, like with Taoist ideas.
Okay, so it had deeper meaning.
Yeah.
And then the Shaolin Monastery enters the story. That's always huge in martial arts lore.
Absolutely iconic. The book mentions Buddhist monks arriving, like Batuo, and then the really famous one, Bodhidharma.
And they weren't just teaching religion, were they? It was a mix.
Exactly. Bodhidharma's arrival was apparently a game changer. He brought Buddhist teachings, yes, but also things like meditation. And crucially, he integrated these with the existing Chinese fighting arts, wushu, they called it then.
So it elevated it beyond just fighting.
Yeah, it became about self-cultivation, training the mind and the body together, a path towards enlightenment, not just combat skill. Martial arts became something more.
Okay, so from China, the story moves to Japan. And the book points to the Genpei War as a major turning point. What happened there?
The Genpei War was critical because it led to the rise of the samurai. They became the dominant warrior class.
Right, the elite warriors.
And their whole way of life, their code, their absolute dedication to martial skill that heavily steered how Japanese martial arts developed. Combat skill was central to who they were.
And Zen Buddhism also played a big role in Japan, the book says.
Zen brought this intense focus on the mental side. It wasn't just about having perfect technique. It was about achieving this mental clarity, like a calm readiness.
So you could react instantly, even dominate mentally.
Exactly. That mind-body unity became fundamental in many Japanese martial arts.
Then the book mentions a period of civil wars and lots of different jujutsu styles popping up, like Daido Ryu. Sounds like a busy time for martial arts development.
Oh, definitely. Constant conflict naturally pushes the development of practical, effective fighting skills. Loads of schools emerged, each with their own spin.
And there was a split in thinking. Jujutsu versus Do.
Yeah, that's an interesting distinction. Many arts started shifting from jutsu, meaning practical skill, technique, towards do, the way, more about personal growth, philosophy.
But Jujutsu didn't.
Largely, no. It kept jutsu in the name, really underlining that its main focus was still practical self-defense, application first.
Okay, that makes sense. Which leads us to Jigoro Kano, big name. He reformed Jujutsu into Judo. That feels like a major fork in the road.
It absolutely was. Kano was apparently worried about jujutsu's reputation, sometimes seen as brutal, undisciplined, maybe even misused in public shows.
So he wanted to clean it up, make it
Oh,
more respectable.
pretty much. He wanted judo to be educational, accessible, so he deliberately took out a lot of the really dangerous stuff, strikes, harsh joint locks, certain throws.
The things likely to cause serious injury.
Right. Focused on safer grappling and throwing. He even changed the language, calling training partners opponents, not enemies. Less aggressive, more ethical framing.
But the old school jujitsu folks weren't thrilled, were they? The book mentions pushback.
Oh, for sure. There was resistance from those deep into the traditional, more combative styles. But Kano was smart, persuasive.
How so?
He basically offered these older schools a place under his Kodokan Judo umbrella, a way to survive.
Mm.
Many joined, but often the deal was they'd mainly promote his judo, sometimes downplaying their own unique styles.
Interesting dynamic. And then you've got Aikijutsu taking a different path. More traditional, maybe?
Exactly. Aikijujutsu kept closer ties to the older Budo traditions, the martial way, with all its ethics and philosophy and that samurai heritage. It often stayed more exclusive.
Passed down in smaller groups?
Yeah, the story of Shiro Saigo is a great example of this tension. Super skilled guy, helped Kodokan Judo a lot in competitions, but he also had deep roots in Dedo-ryu Aikijujutsu. Shows how complex those relationships were.
So, jujutsu spreads from Asia. How did it land in the West? What was the reaction?
Well, around the late 19th, early 20th century, the West got really fascinated with Japan. Judo became popular, often seen as this modern sport.
But some people saw more practical uses.
Right. Military and police forces, especially in Europe and America, saw the self-defense potential. They started asking specifically for jujutsu instruction, but they often wanted something quicker, more direct than the traditional long-term Japanese training path.
And that led to the difference between jujutsu and jujitsu.
Precisely. To meet that demand for faster results, some Japanese instructors in the West created more adaptable, maybe less formal programs.
Kind of a westernized version.
You could say that. And because it was often modified, more flexible, it got known as jujitsu, sometimes seen as maybe a more basic or streamlined take on the original art, though people use the terms interchangeably now.
Okay. And then later, the book says jujutsu saw another surge, especially post-WWII.
Yeah.
Again, driven by military and police needs.
That's right. While judo kept growing globally, the practical value of jujitsu for self-defense in, let's say, professional contexts became clearer again. Russia, France, Germany, they became key centers for its development in the West.
And Russia developed its own related systems.
Yeah, things like rukopashni boy, hand-to-hand combat, and sambo. You can definitely see the influence of those early jujutsu principles in them.
Wow. The book even mentions jujutsu reaching Serbia early on through Russian Cossacks and later emigres like Evgeny Maksutov, and even a Japanese Kodokan master showing up accidentally.
It just shows how these arts traveled and mixed. It's a global story.
Absolutely. Okay, let's pivot now specifically to Kyokushinjutsu itself. The book breaks down its practice into three main parts. What are those?
Right. The training methodology has three pillars. First, the basic self-defensive program. That's our main focus today.
Okay.
Second is the program for masters or special forms. And third is the offensive program, which uses Kobudo weapons techniques.
Got it. So the basic self-defensive program, what's its main goal?
Its core aim is pretty specific. Efficient defense against an unarmed, untrained attacker. The book calls this the layman. It's about using learned techniques and tactics against just raw strength and aggression.
And this basic program has levels within it.
Yep, 3 progressive levels to structure the learning. Basic forms first, then complex forms, and finally free forms.
Let's break those down. Basic forms, what's the focus there?
Basic forms are about learning reliable answers to 6 common grabs. Think typical attacks: grabbing your arm, lapels, over your arms, front or back, neck grab, forearm grab.
The most likely stuff you'd encounter.
Exactly. You practice these through Katachromite structured partner drills with preset moves. The focus is nailing the tactics, the model technique for each grab, and developing a strong, immediate counterattack.
So learning a core set of responses. Then you move to complex forms. How do they build on that?
Complex forms take the techniques from basic forms and add what the book calls limited improvisation. Meaning, in a real fight, your first move might not work perfectly, right? So complex forms give you alternatives, linking techniques together smoothly.
Like a plan B.
Kind of. Maybe your strike doesn't land right, so you flow into a throw. Or a throw doesn't work, you transition to a lock. Or a lock into another strike. all still based around those 6 core attack scenarios.
The book gives examples, like a failed throw from one basic form turning into a lock from another, or different ways to handle a rear arm grab if the first escape fails.
Exactly. You're learning to adapt on the fly, to connect techniques. It gives you a more versatile toolbox for those what-if moments when things don't go exactly as planned.
Makes sense. You need that adaptability. And the final level is free forms. Sounds like where you make it your own.
That's the highest level in the basic program. Here, practitioners are encouraged to really develop their own way of doing self-defense, moving past set patterns.
Relying more on instinct.
Yeah, improvisation, intuition, adapting to the chaos of a real fight. By then, you've internalized the principles from basic and complex forms, and you can apply that knowledge creatively. Develop your own effective responses.
So, a clear path. Learn the rules, learn how to bend the rules, then learn how to break them effectively. Okay, let's talk tactics. The book stresses the defensive nature first.
Yes, 2 key ideas underpin the tactics. No attack, no use of the art, and defense from the untrained attacker. It's all about responding, not starting trouble, and dealing with someone without formal training.
And understanding the attacker's mindset is crucial. It even references Miyamoto Musashi.
Yeah, figuring out if the attacker is hesitant, insecure, maybe overly aggressive, or even scared, that gives you a tactical edge. Like Musashi said, knowing your opponent lets you anticipate them, maybe get the upper hand mentally before anything physical even happens.
And if it's a sudden attack, the advice is just act.
Pretty much. A surprise attack often shows a lack of real courage, relying on shock. In that moment, immediate action, even if it's not perfect, is usually better than freezing up. Making distance helps too, gives you a second to think.
Psychological prep is big too. Tactical recognition of personal abilities. Distinguishing rational fear from pathological fear.
Right. Normal fear is fine, healthy even. But becoming paralyzed by fear, the fear of fear, the book calls it, that's the problem. Kyokushinjutsu stresses self-control to manage that.
And that connects to Zen and Tameshiwari.
Yeah, the book mentions the Zen idea of Santa, basically, indifference to fear, and links it to the mental toughness built through Tameshiwari, the breaking practice. Overcoming that physical fear helps in real situations.
Okay, what about initiating the defense, the tactical introduction? The book lists ways like scaring, angering, calming, deceiving, surprising. Sounds like mind games.
They kind of are. Against an untrained person who acts on impulse and loses focus easily, these psychological tricks can really work to grab the initiative. Well, scaring might be a strong stance, a loud ki shout. Angering them can make them sloppy, like that story in the book about the student using a puddle and spitting to provoke the guy.
Huh. I remember that. Clever, if risky.
Right. Calming an overconfident attacker makes them careless. Deception, surprise, it's all about messing with their expectations, catching them off guard.
And then there's Kuemi Uchi, getting in close. What's
Yeah.
the tactic there?
The idea is an untrained person grabbing you up close often does it in a predictable, uncontrolled way. Kyokushinjutsu teaches you to use that clumsy grab as the trigger.
Turn their move against them.
Exactly. Accept or even force the close range. Use their grab to launch your counterattack instantly. That's SEN, automatic technique application, the moment you feel contact.
The book also mentions how attackers might act after they think they've won, getting cocky, careless.
Yeah, that moment right after they take you down or get control, they often relax mentally, get euphoric, maybe start taunting. That carelessness is a window, a chance for the defender to turn things around if they're aware.
Okay, shifting to ethics and law. Kyokushinjutsu seems very strict about responsible use,
Very much so. There are 5 main ethical rules.
which are
1, don't misuse the art, basically, don't go looking for trouble. 2, don't profane the art, only use it against a real threat. 3, never attack, purely self-defense.
Okay.
4, defeat an opponent without harming his health or pride if possible, use minimum necessary force. And 5, don't wish for evil even if forced to apply it, act out of necessity, not anger or malice.
And how does this connect to the legal idea of necessity defense?
Necessity defense is the legal justification for self-defense found in many legal systems, including the Yugoslavian law the book cites. It usually requires an unlawful attack happening right now that you didn't provoke, and that poses a real serious danger.
So the ethics help you stay within those legal lines. What if you use too much force? The book mentions encroachment of limits.
That's when your defense is seen as excessive for the threat you faced. While it can lead to legal trouble, the law often recognizes that under intense stress from an attack, people might overreact. There can be leniency, especially with strong emotional distress.
But following the ethical rules makes that less likely.
Exactly. The ethics guide you towards using proportionate force, which helps keep your actions legally justifiable as self-defense.
Makes sense. So who is this Kyokushinjutsu method really for? The book seems quite specific.
Primarily, it's geared towards Security Services Army, police special forces, because it focuses on effective techniques you can learn relatively quickly.
But others too.
Yeah, also suitable for experienced martial artists wanting to add skills, veterans looking for a practical activity, or just anyone really dedicated to learning jujutsu as their main thing.
But there's a strong warning about kids doing it.
A very strong warning. The techniques can be quite forceful, and things like tameshiwari, the breaking, carry injury risks for developing bodies. The advice is clear. Instructors should guide kids to more age-appropriate sports or recreational martial arts.
Okay, let's talk more about Tameshiwari, the breaking tests. They look impressive, but what's the actual point in Kyokushinjutsu?
It's not just for show. It serves a few key roles: perfecting your striking technique, developing real power, and importantly, building mental focus and overcoming fear.
So technique is key, not just brute force.
Absolutely. The book stresses that technically sound strikes are crucial for success. Practicing tameshiwari actually helps you refine your form, your power generation. It introduces the idea of the smashing strike focusing energy through the target.
Are there safety measures? It looks risky.
Definitely. Using cloth padding on striking surfaces is important. Gradualism starting small and slowly increasing the difficulty. And a qualified master instructor needs to judge readiness. The goal is better technique, not just breaking piles of stuff.
And mentally, it connects back to that Santa idea, indifference to fear.
Exactly. Facing that challenge, breaking something with your hand or foot, pushing past the hesitation that builds the mental resilience you need when facing a real threat. You learn to focus and commit under pressure.
Got it. So finally, the training program itself. Q ranks leading to mastership. How's it structured?
There are 5 Q ranks, the apprentice levels, starting at 5th Q, yellow belt, up through orange, green, blue, to 1st Q, brown belt.
Getting progressively harder.
Yep, more techniques, more complexity. Tameshiwari gets introduced around 3rd Q, the green belt. By 1st Q, brown belt, you need to show all 6 basic forms and some complex forms.
And then the mastership. First, Dan black belt. What does that test involve?
That's a big step. It requires technically perfect demos of all 6 groups of complex forms, plus a comprehensive tameshiwari test with various strikes.
So high technical standard. Anything else?
Yes. Beyond technique, they look for high ethical standards, rational thinking under pressure, and a wise, responsible attitude towards violence. It's not just about the moves.
How long does it take?
The book gives estimates, but it really depends on the individual aptitude, dedication, how often you train. It varies a lot.
Right. And the book wraps up with a comment from a Chinese reviewer, Lu Guangpo. What did he think?
He gave it a thumbs up, basically. He saw Kyokushinjutsu as this effective blend, European training methods, simplified Japanese techniques, but still rooted in deep Chinese martial traditions. He thought it was a valuable, modern self-defense art.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive on Kyokushinjutsu, it's clearly much more than just fighting techniques.
Definitely. It's got that deep historical grounding. It blends the mental and the physical as specific tactical approaches, a strong ethical core.
And that structured training, from basics right up to personalization, it's quite a complete package.
Yeah, the focus on the untrained attacker, the psychological tactics, the idea that mastery means ethics and discipline, not just skill, that really stands out.
It does make you think differently about self-defense, doesn't it? It's not just knowing moves, but the whole mental game, the responsibility.
Exactly. Knowing when and how, and maybe more importantly, why.
Hopefully, exploring Kyokushinjutsu gives everyone listening a richer sense of what goes into these arts. Maybe spark some curiosity to look deeper.
Or just appreciate the complexity behind something that can seem simple on the surface.
Kyokushinjutsu, then,
Yep.
where that path of self-defense truly meets the discipline of self-mastery.